Hey there everybody, this is Jonathan Ross. In the following tutorial we're going to take a quick look at how to create buttons or different strategies for creating buttons in Edge Animate. So I have a big gallery of a bunch of different buttons here and just a bunch of different ways to create them, and we're going to quickly look at how these are created. Now these are meant to be a sample file that you can actually extract the file here and get the code that you need. So the very first one of the extremely simple buttons. This first one, all it is just an image that's been placed on the timeline, and that's it. If you change the cursor to it to a pointer by selecting that element and then selecting that cursor, then it looks like it acts like a button, which is really nice. Now we can also do this with CSS and a text label as well, because buttons always have to have some sort of text, and the problem is that when you create a button with a graphic like this, then it doesn't really have any major SEO value. Now that being said, of course you can give it a title in your accessibility, and that is an excellent thing to do if you are using images as elements, like graphic elements in your files. Anyway, because this one is a live text field, it does have its CSS. You should probably also consider using the title, of course. But with this particular element, it's got the name of the element, the title of that element, just so you know. And what I've done is given it white text and a little bit of a shadow, just so I could see that particular white text that's in there. Now, I'm also giving this thing a class, and that class is button BG. Now the reason I give it that class is because I can now target that class with a little bit of CSS and change its color. So if I take a look at my code here, at the very beginning I'm going to change the label of that button. I'm actually changing it to the exact same name that I already have there. And I'm adding this class that says sim, which is to the timeline, add a class, and that's what that dot is indicating, is that it's going to be a class, and it's going to change the background color to red for that class. Now when I hover over that, or I go to that button, when I mouse over it, then what I'll do is I'll change the background color. Let's see, mouse over, the background color will change to blue. The mouse out, the background color will change back to the original color, which was red. So very simple way to create a button that has a background color. The only problem with it is that you can't see it in Edge. You can only see it when you test the movie. Now one of the quick thing about this to realize is that this text is centered using the leading or line height property of that particular text element. So just something to know, that's how you get that to center properly. Now these are a little bit more traditional buttons that we have here. And what I mean by traditional is that they're symbols, and when you go inside of them, they actually have the animation of their up and over inside the symbol themselves. And then inside the symbol, it has the mouse over and mouse out code. So this says mouse out will stop at the up section, and mouse over will stop at the over section. Now mouse out, we could just have it stop at the very beginning, because it's the exact same thing, but it's fairly traditional to have a section called up. So there we have up at the very beginning and over, and all it does is jump to each section and stop. Now with the next one here, I've got a label on it as well, and so here's the label text and the rounded rectangle, and the rounded rectangle changes color to each section, and then we have that same code, except this time we've made what's called an invisible button. Now an invisible button is a rectangle that is the same size as basically what your button is, and then you change its opacity to 0. And what this does is this makes sure that you can't accidentally click on the text or anything else underneath. Now we have the same thing where we have sim stop up and the sim stop over for our mouse over and mouse out events. So really simple. Now this next one down here I want to take a quick look at, because this one's a little bit different. Here you'll see that I have animating up, and what's cool about this is that now I can go ahead and do mouse up and mouse over, and you'll see that it goes from one to the other. And I think there's one more element that I have on it. Let's see. No, I think that's it. If I go ahead and test this, let's see what it looks like. Yeah, all we get is just this quick animation. So all of these just kind of like show me that. They don't necessarily animate. And that's what we're looking at these. These animate these properties. And that's much more interesting. So the question is, how do they animate it? On this one, these happen to be, I guess, CSS buttons here. This first one, what I'm doing is changing the background color and changing the background color on the thing as well. And by the way, we could be using a class, but instead I'm actually targeting the background that's already there, which is this background element or rectangle that I've created. Now, that's cool. You could also apply a class to this if you wanted to. It's just kind of cool. Let's look at the next one. Now this one says it's animated. So if you'll see here that there's no timeline, but if I take a look at it, I've changed a little bit. For example, I'm changing the background of the background color of the background element there, but I'm also making the label move with the translate X about 10 pixels, I think. Yeah. So here it is. On the mouse over, I actually move that label about 10 pixels, and then I also change the background color. Now, what's making this animate is when I go back and look at it, each of those elements is given a class, and that class is useTransition. That's the class that I declared at the very beginning here. And here is where I'm creating that class called useTransition, and it's saying WebKit transition all, with the 20.25 seconds. This is just regular CSS, but I'm attaching it to my live Edge Animate document by using this little dot here. If I didn't have the dot, once again, it would be looking for an element that is on my stage, but the dot actually makes it into a class, which is really, really cool. Now, the one here below, I want you to notice something else about it, and that is that we see both stages of this button. And what we're doing here is we're actually just moving the background position of a sprite, which is kind of cool. I'm just moving it up, I think, 42 pixels here. It could be like, I think it could actually go to like 44 pixels. And so what I'm actually doing is moving the background position of a graphic, and this is actually, if I go inside of it, yeah, this is actually a button. If we look at that button, it looks like this. So the very half of the size of this button, by the way, the height of this button is actually really only the one half of the button. So we can choose this by looking over here, overflow, hidden, and you'll see that it's just cut to that size. It's really small. The problem is I find that this overflow property sometimes gets kicked off very easily. So even though you might save it that way, you come back and you resave the file, and all of a sudden you can see the back end of it again. So you can see everything. So what I do is I add a class, and this class is called hide overflow. And I'm adding that to the outside. What this does is, along with my code over here, here it is, hide overflow, anything that has been given that class will get overflow hidden. That makes sure that it won't accidentally be seen. Now the cool thing about this is that it also has, let me go back to the main element here, that CSS button, it also has the useTransition code. And what that means is that it will actually animate that, and it looks pretty cool when you do that. So I really love how simple transitions in CSS can make really nice animated buttons quickly. Now these are a little bit fancier buttons over here. And the way we create these, for the first one, these are actually the same button. If I take a look, I just have more elements going on inside. Now I also have a little bit different timeline. And what I'm doing here is using an animated button that plays an animation forward and then stops. And if I look at this particular trigger, it just says stop. And then on my invisible button, I have code that says when I mouse over it, it will play the button, and when I mouse out of it, it will play the button in reverse. So instead of jumping to keyframes or adding CSS, I'm actually doing a little bit more extreme animation in here. Now we have this overflow hidden once again, but I find that this sometimes comes off of there. So if I don't have it on there, you'll see there's where that little dot is, and it's actually outside the button, and that will be not hidden enough. So I like to add that code, which is, I've made it hide overflow, I think is what I called it. And you'll see here, what it does is it makes sure that that overflow property is set to hidden. Even though we can set it inside the file, I often find that it's best to set it on the outside of the file to make sure that that sticks. Now this last one, same sort of thing. I'm playing an animation forward and playing it backward. And all I have is a rectangle that's tall that has a gradient on it, which is really cool. You can do that right in Edge itself. And then I move it up and then move it back down. And of course, when we have our overflow property set to hidden, then that looks proper in here. So that's basically all the different buttons that I've created in this particular demo. If you have some other techniques that you come across for Edge Animate, I would certainly be interested in learning more about it. Of course, you just have to find out which technique is easiest for you to employ at any one given time, and also gives you the best results. I find that this simple animated button gives you a lot of flexibility. Now it doesn't have all the sections like what happens when it's the active button and what happens when it's disabled. That means that you would have to make more sections within that button. So you might have other things on the timeline later on which would indicate different sections of the button. But that's for another time. So let me know what you think. Thanks.